Hi, everybody. We are going to pick up with Pinocchio. I hope you all are comfortable. I hope everybody has their beverage. And we're going to get started. We're reading chapter 20 today. So, chapter 20. When Pinocchio is freed from the prison, he sets out for the fairy's house. But on the way, he meets a horrible serpent and afterwards is caught in a trap. Imagine Pinocchio's joy when he was free again. Without losing a second, he left the town and took the road that led to the fairy's little house. Because it had been raining incessantly, the mud was knee-deep, but Pinocchio was not discouraged. He was so eager to meet his father again and his little blue-haired sister that he ran and jumped like a greyhound, and the mud slapped all over him. As he ran, he said to himself, "How many dreadful things have happened to me, and I deserved them, for I am obstinate as a mule. I always wanted my own way, and never listened to those who loved me, and who had 1,000 times more sense than I had. But from now on I shall lead a different life, and become an obedient boy. I have learnt the lesson that disobedient children never prosper, and never gain anything. I wonder if my father is waiting for me. Shall I find him at the fairy's house? Poor Daddy. It's so long since I saw him that I can hardly wait to embrace and kiss him. Will the fairy forgive me for disobeying her? Only to think of the good care she took of me and the kindness she showed me. If I'm alive today, I owe it to her. Could anyone imagine a more ungrateful or heartless boy than I am?" Scarcely had he finished this pondering than when he stopped, suddenly frightened, and went 4 steps back. What had he seen? He saw a huge serpent stretched across the road. Its skin was green, its eyes were fiery, and its pointed tail smoked like a chimney. You cannot imagine Pinocchio's terror. He went a long way back and sat down on a little heap of stones, waiting for the serpent to go about his business and leave the road free. He waited an hour, 2 hours, 3 hours, but the serpent was still there, and even from far away he could see his glowing eyes and the column of smoke coming from his tail. At last Pinocchio took all his courage in both hands, and approaching the serpent, he said, in a very gentle, sweet, insinuating voice, "Excuse me, Mr. Serpent, but would you be so kind as to move on one side of the road, just enough for me to pass?" He might as well have spoken to a wall. No one answered. He began again, with that same gentle voice. "Consider, Mr. Serpent, that I am going home, and my father is expecting me. It's such a long time since I have seen him. Would you let me pass my way?" He waited for some sign in answer to his request, but none came. On the contrary, the serpent, who had until then appeared full of life, became perfectly quiet and almost rigid. He closed his eyes, and his tail stopped smoking. "Maybe he is dead," thought Pinocchio, rubbing his hands together joyfully, and without further ado, he made to jump over him. But just as he was going to jump, the serpent rose suddenly like a spring, and the puppet, in his fright, jumped back, stumbled, and fell. It was a very clumsy fall, for his head got stuck in the mud and his legs up in the air. At the sight of that puppet standing on his head in the mud and kicking with all his might, the serpent was seized with a fit of laughter, and he laughed and laughed and laughed, and laughed until he burst a blood vessel in his heart and died. And now Pinocchio started to run again as fast as he could, so as to reach the fairy's house before dark. But he got so terribly hungry that he jumped over a hedge into a field to pick a few pick a few bunches of musculated grapes. Would that he had not done it. He had barely reached the vines when, crack, his legs were caught between two sharp irons. The pain was so terrible that he saw countless stars of every hue dancing in the sky. The poor puppet was caught in a trap, put there to catch some big polecats that had been terrorizing all the poultry yards of the neighborhood. Chapter 21. Pinocchio is captured by a peasant who makes him work as a watchdog for his poultry yard. As you can imagine, Pinocchio began to scream and cry, but in vain, since there were no houses and there was not a living soul to be seen on the road. Meanwhile, night came on, partly because of the pain caused by the trap, which cut his leg, and partly because he was afraid to be alone in the dark in the middle of the fields. Pinocchio almost fainted. He saw a firefly above his head and called to him, "O little firefly, won't you be so kind as to free me from this torment?" "Poor boy," answered the firefly, looking at him with pity. "However did you get caught in those sharp irons?" "I came into the field to pick a bunch of grapes and—" "But are they your grapes?" "No." "And whoever taught you to take things that are not yours?" "I was hungry." "Hunger, my child, is not a good excuse for taking what is not yours." This conversation was interrupted by the sound of footsteps coming nearer. It was the owner of the field, coming on tiptoe to see if he had caught one of those polecats that were eating his chickens at night. When he took out his lantern from under his coat, he was astonished to see that, instead of a polecat, he had caught a boy. "Ah, you little thief," the peasant said angrily. "So it's you who are eating my chickens." "It isn't I," sobbed Pinocchio. "I only came into the field to pick a few bunches of grapes." "Who will steal grapes? He who will steal grapes will steal chickens too. Leave it to me. I'll teach you a lesson you'll remember for a while." He opened the trap, seized the puppet by the collar, and carried him off to his house as if he had been a lamb. When he reached the yard in front of his house, he threw Pinocchio on the ground, and putting his foot on his neck, he said, "It's late, and I want to go to bed. I shall settle your account tomorrow. Meanwhile, as my watchdog died today, you shall take his place. You shall be my watchdog." Thereupon he put a heavy collar covered with sharp brass knobs on Pinocchio's neck, and fastened it so tightly that he could not slip his head through it. A long iron chain, attached to the collar, fixed it strongly to the wall. "If it rains tonight," said the peasant, "you may go into that little kennel and lie down. You can use the straw that has served for 4 years as a bed for my poor dog. Remember to keep your ears pricked, and if, unluckily, thieves should come, don't forget to bark." With this last advice, the peasant went into the house and locked the door, leaving poor Pinocchio lying in the yard, more dead than alive, with cold, hunger, and fright. From time to time, he put his fingers on the collar that pinched his throat, and said, crying, "It serves me right. It serves me jolly well right. I wanted to be a good-for-nothing and a vagabond. I listened to evil companions, so I have always been unlucky. If I had only been a good boy, like so many others, if I had been willing to study and to work, if I had stayed home with my poor father, I would not be here in this lonely place, working as a watchdog for a peasant. Oh, if only I could be born again! But it's too late now. I must have patience." This complaint, which came from the depth of his heart, relieved him a little. He crawled into the kennel and fell asleep. That's the end of chapter 21. Thank you guys for joining me. I'll see you here tomorrow for more reading. Bye, guys.